Go like this. Should I go through there?
You're fine going out through the other way. That's fine. All right. So. All right. Welcome to the Book Editor Show. Today we're giving you 7 tips to strengthen your setting. I'm Clark Chamberlain, and in a world plagued by poorly written setting, one man stood up and raised his red pencil of justice to edit his way through fields of floundering fiction. That man is my friend and co-host, Peter Turley. Peter, how are you doing today?
I live for these introductions. I hope you know that. It's the highlight of my week. If I'm feeling down on another day, I'll be like, it's fine. Clark will pick you up. He'll swoop in with an introduction to save the day.
Well, I'm glad you're enjoying them. I always enjoy putting them together for you too. So,
no, I'm doing great. Had a great week. Had a interesting weekend out on a pre-production shoot for a trailer that a friend's putting together. So that was quite interesting to see how writing is applied to the screen. So that was really interesting. What about you? Have you been up to anything good?
Yeah. So yesterday I was able to go and speak to a local elementary school, to the 5th and 6th grade classes over there, and talked about story. Of course, talked about Hank Hudson because that's the age group for that book. But it was a lot of fun to teach some basic elements of story. You know, how a story needs to have a person, then they need to be in a place, and they need to have a problem. And it was fun to just hit this with the kids and to go over this and to see what kind of stories they would come up with and share ideas back and forth, and had a lot of fun. You know, I always know that I'm doing a good job with teaching when I get people to laugh about things, even if it's just about me.
Yeah. I mean, I worked in a high school for a number of years, and obviously the 11 to 16 kind of age range is where the majority of them aren't interested in a lot of things. So what's it like sort of working with, the younger age group and trying to get them to because that's like, I mean, their imaginations are wild, aren't they?
They really are, and it was interesting because when I first started talking, I spoke for about an hour, and I asked, hey, who's interested in writing stories? And really there was only like 12 kids that raised their hands. And at the end, I asked again because I wanted to give some books away. And so I wanted to find, because I was like, all right, so there's 12 kids. I'll find 1 or 2 that are brave enough to stand up and share their story idea, right? And then I'll give them a book, and that'll be cool. And so at the end, it's like, yeah, exactly. So at the end, they're like, who wants to share their idea for a story now? And like I had like 78 hands raise up. I was like, oh, this isn't going to work. So, but we went back and forth. I picked out like 10 kids to talk, and they stood up and they were sharing. And some of them are just wild, crazy ideas. Like this girl wanted, she's going to do a story about a plumber in California who is getting abducted by aliens. It's like, that's a serious problem. So, and
that could be the new Mario.
Yes, which actually was in my head, and so so I thought that was fun. But her dad is actually a plumber, and so like we're talking about where we come up with ideas, and then how we can take ideas from our life, but then we increase those ideas by adding all kinds of additional elements and crazy to them. So it was a lot of fun. Yeah. Oh, they're very good with doing that part. So it was good. I'm looking forward this fall. I'm going to be doing a lot more of that regionally here, getting around to speak at different grade schools and talk about writing. So that's going to be a lot of fun.
That's excellent.
Yeah. So one of the things, like I just mentioned in there, is place. The setting is what we want to talk about today, and because it's one of the things I think it can really be overdone, it can be really underdone, and so getting that place right is so difficult, and having that perfect setting so people can feel it in their writing, and then also that it's communicated well through the characters.
Yeah, it's so powerful as well, isn't it? I mean, if you consider something like Harry Potter, I mean, half of the effectiveness of the story is through the sense of place and the feeling of being at Hogwarts, and how well that's put across to the reader. So it's one we really can't skip over, is it, to be honest?
Exactly. And I know for myself, I always have to grow out setting. I have to increase it because I'm one that like really skimps. on the setting and the feel of it when I go through and I'm writing for the first time. And it's something that I always am having to do a lot of editing on to make sure that it's really coming across well.
Yeah. I mean, what would be perfect, if I was out there and I was struggling with setting, would be if just someone or maybe two people could come up with like 7 tips, to help me with this problem.
Yeah, that actually sounds like a fantastic idea. Who could possibly do that?
Who are you going to call?
Who are you going to call? Book editor show. So, so let's
less of a ring to it than Ghostbusters, hasn't it?
It really does. So we can work on that title a little bit better. Okay. But it would be fun if we had, like the ambulance to drive around in and go rescue people in editing situations. So let's dive into these. We got 7 tips. Hopefully these are going to be able to be ideas that you can put to immediate use, really actionable, and can help you with your setting. The first one is using the point of view character to emphasize the place. I always think this is a fantastic way to do this because it allows us to really get a good picture of what the point of view character is actually seeing.
Yeah, and it gives us an insight into the point of view character's mind and how because then it's not necessarily objective setting. It's not how the world is. It could be how that character sees the world. So then we can do 2 things at the same time there. We can portray place, and we can also give a little bit of an insight into who that character is and how they interact with the world around them.
And it's a great way to get out of the narrator head. It's a great way to not have to rely totally on the narrator describing the place. And we can have the character thinking about things or experiencing, like they look across a room or they're looking across a valley and what they feel in that place, in that setting. And that can be much more powerful than just a narrator saying, and the sun rose up across the mountains, or something really kind of bland like that.
Yeah, I think in general we are moving quite a bit away from narration styles anyway in fiction these days. So I think these tools and these techniques are invaluable for us to sort of move the style forwards. But I think a great tip for this one is to consider. So if we're thinking of a point of view character, is to try and just get into the head of that character and consider what they would notice around them, wherever they are. So for example, a soldier would see like a castle differently than, say, a builder. So when they would say approach a building or a place, they'd look at different things and they'd see things differently. And that can be really useful to sort of think, right, okay, well, I only need to pick up on these things, and that can help us build a mood around this person and this place.
Yeah, that's a good point. That we can see more just through the eyes of that one point of view character. And if they, like you said, they're the hero, what background do they have when they come upon this place? Also, with the point of view character, if that's something like uniquely special to them, like a special area that they like to go to think, or it has some sort of meaning to them. Maybe it was a battle that was fought there and a close friend died. You're going to see that place differently. And so when we can explore that and we can express that through the eyes of the point of view character, the reader is going to get the information that they need and not be bogged down by a lot of other things. So we're creating a good sense of setting without having to have that paragraph or 2 paragraphs describing the scene before you can get into it.
Yeah, that's excellent. I mean, we're not just sort of sitting there talking about the sunrise and it is only that. We're kind of doing it, but we're quickly moving on to the feelings and the emotions and everything behind that. So we're kind of dropping setting and place in, but we're not staying there, as you say.
Right, and this, you can use this. We've talked about the reaction units. Can be a reaction unit here, that they spot something, they see something, and they react to it in an emotional way. And when I say emotional, doesn't mean they have to be crying. It's just whatever it makes them feel and think about for a moment before they move forward into going on trying to capture the next thing that they're after, the thing that they're seeking.
Yeah, and I think that moves us to number 2, to add the feeling of the time of year by bringing in season and using season to emphasize place. So what do you think about this one?
So I really like this idea, and sometimes we can forget about this. In the edit for Hank Hudson in the Anubis, it's fall. And fall is brisk, it's cold, and I completely kind of forgot, that it's going to be cold. And I've got the kids going off on this adventure, and they camp overnight. And I realize, that there's no blankets, there's no sleeping bag, there's nothing, and there are no coats. And we can emphasize these things, and feel the cold of the air, feel the chill that's coming along in fall and in winter. And of course, you've got to be in a place that can have season to make this work. Hawaii barely has any change of season at all. It does have when the wind changes and it gets additionally hot, but other than that, or it rains a little bit more. Hot and hotter. But if you have a place that has that, don't forget to punch that up. It's because when we can emphasize time in setting as well, it can really add more immediate feeling. Like, let's talk about the Harry Potter again. Every time they have a Halloween portion in the story, right? And we get that feeling of Halloween. We get that feeling of season, or because of season, that we are now in a cold time and we're at the harvest time, and it's a whole nother feeling that we get because it inspires feelings, because we, as the reader, are going to have those experiences as well. And we're going to have favorite seasons, and we're going to feel those as we read it.
Yeah, that was probably where a lot of because I read all the Harry Potters, and I always had this overwhelming feeling of nostalgia as I was reading them. And that's probably where a lot of that came from, thinking back on it now, that this sense of the seasons changing, and, it's something we can all relate to. And I think, when you're trying to do this and you're trying to think about how a season affects place or character, is to just make sure that we're considering all the 5 senses, and we're just using those to try and, so as you said, Clark, a minute ago, the briskness of the cold air, or the feeling of snow beneath your feet, or when your ears go like so cold that they hurt, and using these senses to really cement the reader in the place and in the setting.
Yeah, and this can also be a great way to combine 2 elements here and add additional problems while increasing the setting. So, for instance, I always hate it when I wake up and find out that the cars have iced over in the morning, and I was not expecting that. And I need to get my son to school, and now I've got to find an ice scraper or something, and all I can come up with is a spatula. Like these kinds of things can add more of that stress to a scene that could otherwise not have stress at all. And so don't forget that you can use these so you can add, where you can have more exposition going on and talking about things that aren't so important. But because of the season, all of a sudden now we have a problem. Cold, we have a problem. It's raining, we have a problem. And that can be the problem in that scene.
Yeah, it's setting can certainly be a form of conflict. And like that, sort of like we said in the first point, that it's about using setting in a multi-pronged way, and not just a paragraph on setting. So yeah, I think it's considering that on each one of these points.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's go to point 3. And this is a great one during your editing. You've got your manuscript finished, and maybe you've had some beta readers come back and say, it seems a little incongruent. The character doesn't seem to match the place where they're at. And we need to double check to make sure that we've correctly built our rural and city areas by looking at our characters and how does our character act. If they've grown up in this rural area but they act all city, is there a reason for that? Have we done a good job of adding those emphasis? Because I explain this in my class at the school, the idea of rural and urban. So I live here in Idaho. It's very flat, open. Houses are very far apart from each other. You're driving everywhere you're going. But let's say you were in Hong Kong. Everything is built right on top of each other. You're going to have thousands of people living in the same building. You're going to be walking everywhere you go. And if our characters respond to that in an opposite manner, that's something we need to look at and see how our setting is affecting our character. Our characters is responding to the setting.
Yeah, and I think on the contrary to that, also would be, if you were writing like a fish out of water story, but then being aware that that's what you're writing. I mean, you don't want to be writing a fish out of water story without knowing that that's what you that's what you're writing. And like you say, you've got your main character who's just completely incongruent with the world around them, and you're oblivious to that fact.
Right, because it's going to come off feeling that way when the person reads it. We're familiar enough with how things should be. We've all seen enough television of big city life. We've all seen enough, small city life, and we have an expectation for the characters to respond to those areas in a particular way. And you can also take a look at your areas to see how the character matches. This is a good way to flesh out a character. Let's say, for instance, if you're in placing your story like in Boston, Massachusetts, and in Boston, it's a very heavily Catholic area. So, that can be something that is setting, that is the place that they're at. And you can add in those elements, those social, those religious, those political elements of that particular region and area to add to the story, to make sure that the characters are interacting the way that we would expect them to in those places.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and really puts the emphasis on how important pre-writing and research is, especially if you're going to be using a real world place.
Exactly. If you're not making it up, and even if you're making it up, try to base it on a real world place so that you can have an anchor to look at, to compare your notes to. Number 4, feathering a description throughout a scene, and use action to help with this. Peter, what were your thoughts on number 4?
So I was thinking this is linked a little to the first one. So, and it's got the running thread that they all do, which is, we're trying to not just have a big block of description or a big block of scene, and to put it throughout and to make it do several things at once. And a great way to kind of feather it in this manner is to use action. So instead of passively describing the setting around us and the room and who's in it, but to have a character go into that place or go into that room, see it through their eyes, and to interact with it, and to use their interactions with the objects and the people as a way of portraying setting to the reader. So not the only way to do it, but a really powerful way. So, if say a soldier goes into a bar or a tavern, and immediately they're going to be less relaxed than everyone else. They're going to eye up the shady guy in the corner. They're going to check, if people have got weapons or not, and they're going to interact with the room in a totally different way. And you can use those points to describe the room and everything that's in it. And I think that that's just a much more active way of doing it than to passively just give away the scene. The character enters and it looks like this. When you're using it in an active way, it's much more engaging for the reader to see it this way, and they feel a little bit more like they're there and they're cemented within that place themselves.
Right, because that's actually a really good point to emphasize the idea that when we dump this information on someone, So like, if you're one of the people who writes the first paragraph, the first two paragraphs, it's all scene or all setting description of where it's taking place, or the scene's taking place. It's one of those bumps, that can really push you out of the story for a moment, that you are realizing, oh yeah, this is a story, and when you can blend it like that, when you can blend in this interaction with the characters into the setting, that it can feel so much more, it will give the reader a more virtual reality experience versus reading a story experience. And it's not the easiest thing to do, though. I think it's probably, as in the editing work that I do, I think it's one of the most difficult things that authors struggle a lot with, is knowing how much setting to put in, where to put it in, and when to emphasize it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a good tip for this is that I feel that we always have a tendency to over-describe, and we think that, we need to tell the reader more than they need to know, and especially in setting and place. And I think, the mantra "less is more" really rings true with this one, and especially in the first draft. We don't really need to worry. If there's too little and we look back in an edit, then we can solve that. So I would definitely err on the side of less. And one or two or three points delivered well can be far more effective than a paragraph describing a scene. And like you say, it's a bump. Whereas when a character's interacting with the scene, it flows, it's active, there's movement, and just like you said, it's virtual reality, because the reader's being taken on a tour. They're not being allowed to stop and pause. Although there is a place for that in story. It's just a good thing to practice, and I think, err on the side of less, and then when you come to edit it, look back and think, do I need to put a little bit more in? Am I conveying the scene properly?
Right.
But it's way better than having to cut it back, and you've done a big chunk on the sunrise and the rain and the bar and the smoke in the air, and then you've got to think, right, I need to narrow this down, because at least if if we take into account point one and we're using the POV character, that really gives us a laser-like focus as to what needs to be emphasized and what we can leave out.
Mm-hmm. Now, I guess we should add that caveat to this, is that there are places that do require massive amounts of description, like when you start getting into hardcore science fiction, where it's hard science is real science, or you're getting into historical fiction where the people who are going to be reading this are historians who want to experience the full-on description of a saddle or a World War I airplane and the proper interaction with that. But you can still put this in with interaction with your characters and not have to dump it on top of the reader.
Yeah, I mean, there could be a character could be in a room, and there could be a book on like World War II airplanes sitting on the table, and instead of just saying that it's on the table, the character could pick it up and thumb through it because it's of interest to them. Like they're waiting for another character, they pick it up and they thumb through, and perhaps they see something that's relevant later on, but they put it back down. And just little tips like that, as you say, it can be hard to implement. But yeah, there is definitely places for big wads of description, and
right.
It does depend on what you're writing.
And you could use two characters talking, like maybe they're fixing an engine. Like if you needed to bring out the description of this engine in a way, maybe they're working on the engine and fixing it and talking back and forth, but not talking necessarily about the engine, that the engine comes in through the story and maybe, hey, hand me this type of socket wrench and we need to replace this type of valve, if you needed to get into that kind of dense description. But remember, we want to still add some sort of conflict that's going on in this. It's difficult to fix the engine. It's having an argument about something else. Maybe it's a father and son working on this engine, and they're having an argument about something that's going on in the son's life. But the engine is, we're learning all about whatever this time period is. And so look at places where you have large chunks of description and think, how could I incorporate more conflict into this and still do a good job of describing it? Could I bring in a different character that would help have a discussion about this, and I could weave that in, I could feather that in, so I could still have it, but it's going to be delivered in a way that doesn't feel jarring.
Yeah, and it ain't easy.
No, it's not.
You know,
no, editing's not. I mean, you've got to work, and you've got to decide what, and you need to look at each of these and decide, is it worth taking the time that it's going to take to rewrite this or put this together differently, or should I just cut way back on what the big info dump I did? Which,
I can't believe it took us to point 4 before we said info dump.
Yeah, and taking an info dump. So let's talk about point 5, the social structure found in the place. And I think we kind of hit on this just a little bit in 3 to double check your areas.
Yeah. So do you want to talk about
so,
that? That was,
again, I think I kind of hit it pretty well when I said before, but it's the whole idea about taking a look at how the social structure should be operating in the area that you're located. In a large city, even in huge cities like New York, you're going to find people who have, like you're going to have communities that have formed up around particular ideals and belief systems. Certainly you could get an apartment where everyone has different belief systems, but there are these communities still in there. And that's the question, the social structure that exists in the town, in the setting, in the place that you're at needs to be recognized. And it's a good way to bring that out, and so people can feel what that place is really like.
Yeah, definitely. I was fortunate enough to meet the Scottish author Alan Bissett a month or 2 ago, and he was talking a little bit about this. And his novels are based sort of around Falkirk in Scotland, where he's from, and it really comes across in his writing. This sense of place, this sense of local politics, everything that's going on in that social and political world, and that really drove that home to me, that you have really got to know this stuff and consider what area you're writing about, and almost what gives you permission to do that, and how can you do it justice, especially if, like, fantasy and science fiction aside for the moment, especially if you're talking about real world places, what needs to be said about this place, what would the people of this place like to be said? But then also that can be translated to fantasy. You can think, okay, so what are these places like in our world, and would these same social structures exist? Would a rural village in a fantasy setting encounter the same problems as a rural village in our world? Chances are they would, wouldn't they? And these things can sort of move across genres, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And there's an advertisement for a cruise line that I see occasionally, and one of the lines that always I remember, it's like basically it's "Don't be a tourist, be a local" idea, and that's what you need to do. You need to become that local. You need to understand what it is, because that's what the cruise line is trying to sell to people, is you're going to get a full experience of going there, not just some glazed over tourist experience. You're going to get the real life experience. And I think readers want that. They want to have a feeling that they have interacted with a place, not just the people, but also the place and the feeling that comes with it. And a lot of that comes from the social structure of that place and how people interact with each other, what the politics of the area are, whether or not they go to bed at 7 p.m. or stay up super late. These things are all part that are going to make you feel like you are at a real location.
Yeah, that just really makes me think of Terry Pratchett's first novel, Colour of Magic, where Two Flowers, the tourist, and he's going around Ankh-Morpork, and he wants like a real experience of what it's like to live there. Then it's kind of like a play on that idea. I guess.
Yeah,
and it's true, isn't it? Yeah, you don't want the snapshot. You want the grit, and
and the feeling that's going to last with you for the rest of your life. That you really feel like you were there, and not just passing through. And if your story feels like that, if the reader just feels like they're passing through from place to place, and they're not getting rooted in that place and interested to interact more with that place, and then that's where you got to start really looking. And this is a great way to use your beta readers to say, how's my setting? Do you feel like you're there? Is there enough? Is there too much?
Does my setting look big in this?
Yes, is my setting. That's my setting.
But Clark, what if you've not been there? How can we get knowledge of somewhere if we've not been there?
That's a fantastic question.
That's a problem right there.
That is a problem. Well, we can turn to technology. Our number 6 tip is using Google Maps to increase your knowledge of an area. I did this last year when I was writing the second part, which of course, is still not released yet, for Another Day, Another Name. And the second book, and it takes a big chunk of it takes place in Japan, Tokyo specifically. I've never been. But it's really awesome. Today, I can grab Google Maps, and I did this. I walked up and down streets where I wanted things to be taking place. One of them was outside of a Tokyo police station. I wanted to see what that area looked like. Could I bring vehicles in? What was going on? What are the other shops that are in the area? What does the area just look like in general? And it's really cool to be able to do that today.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? It's like we're in the future and we don't even realize it.
Exactly. The Google Maps can't replace going to a spot and interacting with locals, but it certainly can give you an idea of what it looks like, and so that you can get those details right. And especially if you're writing a real place like Tokyo, because if someone from that area wanted to pick up the book, it's going to feel more real to them because you got the details right.
Yeah. And as we said in the last point, it's important to get those right, especially if someone from that place is going to be reading your book.
So, and and that sometimes is a reason why it's easier to just make up a place because you don't have that pressure to get everything right. But
it'd be really weird if you were at like a sign-in and someone from one of your fantasy villages turned up.
That would be strange. They're like, you totally got Burgestein wrong. That is not how the politics in Burgestein are. Did you want to add anything on that, or any other technology that you found?
I just think that going off that it's good to use these tools. And if anyone knows any others, drop us a line and let us know. But it helps us then consider what needs describing. So you said that you went up and down like Tokyo, but you didn't just like load up Tokyo and then just describe it in an info dump. There we go. No. Said it again. You looked and you considered what needs to be described. And I think here is where it's good to consider where there's a knowledge gap with the reader and the setting. So obviously, everyday objects and everyday buildings don't need to be overly described because we all have several things in common and one or two words will often suffice. But there'll be things in Tokyo that perhaps someone from Idaho wouldn't recognize immediately. And so did you find that useful to sort of like look at those things and think, right, so this is a new thing and this is going to need a little bit more description than that?
I did, because one of the things that I was doing with this, there's a police officer who works there in Tokyo, and they're bringing people in, right, to be booked on charges. And so the narrowness of the streets and what type of vehicles could be brought in there actually made a difference, on because I had pictured this idea of this really long procession of armored type vehicles. But when I was looking at it, it was actually a very narrow area, and how you turn off onto the street would be very difficult to do. And so like it made me rethink that scene and rework it.
Yeah. And that just shows how powerful it is, because, you know, there are people out there that would pick up on that, like, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. Do you ever watch the comedy Modern Family?
I don't think so.
So it's a pretty humorous show. This last week they had the characters are all on this train ride in the United States, and two of them run into this author, this kind of reclusive author, you know, who's had 2 great books and hasn't had the 3rd one come out yet, type of deal. And so they're really excited to meet him. And the reason why the author is on the train is because he's writing a murder mystery that happens on a train. And they keep telling him things that keep screwing him up. They're like, oh, but what about the cameras up on top of the train? How could he walk across the top of the train and not be seen? And so you see the author like completely getting defeated again and again, trying to like rework the problems and the issues found on this. And and some of that type of stuff maybe is not so important for the genre that you're writing in, and it's okay to flub some of this, but try to be as realistic as possible with it, because that just adds more to your authority, that you took the time to make sure you got it right.
Yeah, and you know, especially in the editing process.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So this leads us to our number 7, and this is creating mood elements from the place. And I think we've already talked briefly about this with Harry Potter. But absolutely, you know, like there's a lot of mood and setting that takes place in that story, or there's a lot of mood created by the settings in that story.
Yeah, and it's so powerful. I mean, like almost more so than plot, because we've talked about this, I think, in the last show, that, you know, that's what you leave a novel with, isn't it? That's what sort of comes away from you a little bit. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a sort of good versus evil story. But the moods and the feelings have often come from place and from setting and from seasons and from social structures. Basically, everything we've talked about, you know, can combine to leave the reader feel in a certain way. And I think that it's effective, as we said earlier, to sort of consider what we've all got in common. You know, what's like a common human experience. So, you know, like Christmas and birthdays. You know, like the first Harry Potter, it's his birthday, isn't it? And we all know what birthdays are like, and we can all sort of sympathize with what it would feel like if you didn't get anything for your birthday and you were dragged off to some island in the middle of nowhere, and then a half giant turns up to tell you you're a wizard. That would be pretty awesome.
Well, and, you know, talking Harry Potter, like, so let's say the haunted, or the it's not the haunted forest, what do they call it? But the woods outside of the castle there, which are very dangerous, which you know, you feel that immediately. You know, we've hit that, like you're saying. We know what it's like to walk out in the woods without having a light, or, you know, not having the protection of your adult figure there, because they split up. And so we can immediately start to feel this mood of distress being created because of the forest. And that's a great way to do this. You know, I mean, they would not be scary at all to go out and try to find the dying unicorn if they did it in daylight and there's rainbows over the place, and you know, the birds are singing and chirping and being sweet. And
Dumbledore was there.
And Dumbledore is there with you the whole time. You know, mood is created in these ways. You know, it's difficult to be scary in the daylight. But doing the haunted house at night, you know, like that feeling of fear can be just so much more amped up when you set it at night. You set it in a creepy building, you set it in this place, and that's another way to establish those moods.
Yeah, and that's why exercises such as, you know, when you're building a character profile and you consider, you know, that character's dreams and ambitions, their fears, and then, you know, you can work these in. But also when you're doing this, even though you're building a character profile, you're actually kind of putting yourself on the page a little bit, or you're putting the people that you know around you on the page. And these are all, even though they're going to be about a fictitious character, they're all relatable feelings. They're all relatable ambitions that we're all going to feel equally crappy about if they don't, come to pass. Or they're all relatable fears that we'd all be terrified about. So I think, really capitalizing on that.
Mm-hmm. And this isn't just for scary moods. This is for any type of mood. If you're trying to create a mood and it's just not working, take a look at your setting and how can you manipulate the setting and change it. Maybe even moving it to an entirely different location to increase the mood you're trying to bring across in that scene.
Like, imagine if in all like horror movies, none of the doors were creaky.
Right.
That would ruin half the mood right there.
Exactly. And there's just so much fun that you're going to be able to do with this. And this is a great way to go through and take a look. And it's awesome. Go through your manuscript and block out, mark where you've got these large blocks of descriptive text of the setting, mark where you're trying to create a different type of mood, mark where you could use this with different character elements to help describe the scene or the setting in the scene that's taking place. This is just a great way to go through this and systematically make awesome changes that are going to just increase the readability and likability and shareability of your work.
The magic 3.
The magic 3 there. So, Peter, do you want to add anything here at the end for us?
I don't know. No, I feel for once I've said it all.
You always do. So always appreciate your insights on these things. But if you, dear listener, like the show, please leave us a review on iTunes, a plus on Google, or a like on YouTube. And if you're an editor who would like to be a guest on the show, stop by the Book Editor Show and drop us an email. Also, if you haven't signed up for our list yet, we have the secret to connecting emotionally with your reader. Pick that up if you're having a difficult time trying to figure out where you should be targeting the book that you've written. It's a great way to work through some of these issues, connect with your reader in an emotional way, and be able to increase that readability, shareability that you want to have there at the end. Just stop by the Book Editor Show. You can sign up for that. You'll immediately get the download worksheet, and then you'll also hear some great stuff from us later on. And I'm Clark Chamberlain, and for my co-host Peter Turley, keep writing, keep learning, and build a better book.